This is a continuation of chapter 14, and we are starting on page 369. All right. Now, your book goes on to also talk about how top predator fish have high levels of toxins, specifically mercury. Again, tuna and your swordfish are these top predator fish, and this is all because of biomagnification. So this is the reason why expectant mothers are not supposed to eat large amounts or quantities regularly of tuna or swordfish or other top predatory fish due to the potential of mercury contamination and poisoning, which could affect their unborn child. All right, make sure that you review about these two scientists and just make sure you have an idea of what that they do. All right, and all they did is basically did some showing how reproductive abnormalities to endocrine disruptors from pesticides, and they study both in frogs and alligators. Okay. All right, the next thing we're going to be talking about is the LD50. Now, when we do this one, we're only talking about your normal toxins, not your endocrine disruptors. As we said before, they're going to be opposites. So if we look at these charts, all right, this is a linear dose curve. All right, so at 50%, and this will be your lethal dose, and this is your dose response curve. Okay, this is with a threshold. Now, in our sample data that we did with our labs, we didn't have a threshold. So this is at a point when no one is negatively affected, no one died. So that's your threshold. So once you start having someone be negatively affected, then that's where your threshold ends. So we can see here. Now, this is an unconventional dose curve. As you can see here, almost immediately we are being affected, so there is no threshold. And then eventually it tapers off. All right. So just make sure that you review this. Also, as a reminder, when you have a high LD50, that means it's a low toxicity. When you have a low LD50, that means the toxin is highly toxic. So the lower the amount of milligrams per kilograms it takes for 50% of the population to die, the more toxic it is. All right. In this little study about did pesticides impair child development in Mexico, this is a perfect example of epidemiological study. It basically shows what happens to children's brains when they're exposed to pesticides. So as you can look at the differences in the child's drawing and cognitive and hand-eye coordination at the age of 4 and 5, there's a big discrepancy and difference. So this is just a great case study to prove what we do here. Okay. Okay, the next topic is risk assessment and risk management. If you look at this figure here, big thing is a lot of the times, especially in the US, we don't necessarily weigh the risk in reality. So pretend that there's a cleaner, like household cleaner, and it kills 1 in 10 million people, right, when they did testing. Do we keep it on the market or do we take it off? And how they decide this is by doing a risk assessment. And they tell if it really is a risk to have it. Now, if you look at the risks, and a lot of people will spend more money on car insurance or are afraid to fly and rather drive places, when in reality, your risk of dying in a motor vehicle incident is 1 in 113, where your air and space transport incidents are 1 in 9,737. So clearly your risk is much less when you fly versus when you drive. However, there's still a lot of people that refuse to fly because they're afraid to fly. Notice our riskiest are heart disease and cancer, then our chronic respiratory disease, and so forth. So just keep this all in mind. That the way that we pay or spend money to prevent certain risks don't actually result or correlate with the reality of them happening in the first place. All right, so again, vocabulary. Make sure you know the difference between risk assessment, risk management, the CDC, which is the Center of Disease Control, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and then the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. The EPA's acceptable risk is 1 in 1 million. So as long as only 1 in 1 million die from whatever it is, then it's okay. They're not going to remove it. They're not going to suggest that it be terminated or practices be changed. Okay. Make sure that you know the 2 approaches to product testing. So there's the innocent until proven guilty approach, which is what the United States for the most part practices. So if you look over the steps, and then there's a precautionary approach. So Europe does the precautionary approach. We don't even attempt to give an option of potentially getting sick from something. They just say, nope, we're gonna just ban it. So make sure you know the difference between the 2. All right, some other vocabulary. FIFRA, it basically is the federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, okay, and it regulates pesticides for safety. The EPA administers the law, so it's basically all talking about your fungus and your insecticides. OSHA, this is a government organization that regulates workplace safety, so they're the ones to make sure that accidents can be prevented, that you're not exposed to certain chemicals, that the handling, if you work in like a lab, the MSDS, which is includes all the like safety hazards and what you should or should not do if you're exposed to them or ingest them or get them on your skin. It's just to prevent any accidents from occurring. So that's what OSHA is in charge of. Okay, TSCA, which is the Toxic Substance Control Act of 1976. This law requires the EPA to monitor industrial chemicals only. It's not all chemicals, it's just those that are from industrial practices. So make sure you know that. Okay, REACH. This is how Europe differs from the US in treating chemicals. So REACH again is a European or the EU's program. So make sure you review that and understand how Europe, obviously, they do a lot more thorough testing of their chemicals and regulating chemicals than we do here in the United States. Hence why a lot of things are banned there and not banned in the United States. So here's one like nice little chart to compare that. All right. And the last thing that you need to know from this chapter is about the Stockholm Convention. It happened in 2003. It's an international treaty, and this is when we banned the Dirty Dozen. All right, and the top 3 of the Dirty Dozen are PCBs, DDT, and dioxin, and that's because they all don't break down. And here is your Dirty Dozen, okay, of your persistent organic pollutants. Remember, that means that they don't break down. So, so yeah, just to give you an idea. But again, DDT, dioxins, and your PCBs are the top 3 that you need to make sure you know. All right, and that is it for chapter 14.